Welcome to Off the Wire, the podcast that helps you curb your cybersecurity risk and tackle technology challenges. I'm Tanner and I'm joined by Anthony. We're two IT executives with 35 years of experience. Let's start the show. Welcome back to Off the Wire podcast. Today we're talking about technology training. We're going to talk about how we do it, ways that we feel like it could be improved, and how we continue that training exercise from the minute we get a technology all the way through the life cycle of that technology. But before we jump in, please just go ahead and subscribe if you're not already subscribed to us. And if you're on YouTube or any of the other platforms, click that bell that lets you be notified of all the alerts. That way, whenever we post a new episode or any new content, you're aware of it right away. And as always, we ask you to share if you feel like this is providing you value. Please share it with a colleague who you think it would also provide value. And if you're so inclined, you can always share it on your social media. That helps the show grow. All right, Anthony. So IT training. I think a lot of our techie people out there probably thinking to themselves, IT training, this is this is something we don't even worry about. We do a class as soon as we put out a new technology and people get it and we move on to the next project. But me and you we were talking pre-show about there's a lot of pitfalls with technology training. And I think the primary one, and you tell me what you think, but I think the primary one is that when someone comes in for a new role, so let's say you have someone that's forward facing to customers and they come in as a new role, maybe there's someone retiring or maybe it's just expanding on that position. You basically take the person who is the best at it, or you take the person who is getting ready to retire and they train that person. And they probably do an outstanding job training them on what they're going to do on a day-to-day basis from a customer service perspective. But are they training them on the technology that they're going to use, that foundational level technology? Are they giving them a little outlook class? Yeah, how do you feel about that, Anthony? Do you feel like that's a big deficiency that we face?
We just had this recently, and it was, someone using, like, Google Drive instead of, OneDrive. We don't have Google accounts and stuff like that for work, and initially, I was like, "Well, should the department have discussed this?" But thinking about it, really, that's really on IT. Now, if we had a training person, you could say it's on the training department, but a lot of us organizations were too small to have a dedicated training person. Now, actually, our organization is looking at getting one, and you need to be given instructions, and we did that when we rolled it out. When we rolled out Office 365, well, that's been over 5 years ago now. So we've
Mm-hmm.
had probably 30% of our company is new people, and it's not fair to them that they don't have that training. So I definitely think it's on us to do that. And one thing I heard in management training is clear is kind and unclear is unkind. So, like, for me to get on that person for doing that would be the wrong thing to do. Like, they had no way of knowing without us telling them.
Yeah, I think in the past we've just struggled to, we get, and I think a part of this is because of the pace. I think technology pace it's gotten a lot faster, and so we have a tendency to kind of like as soon as we get done with the project, we're like, okay, training, we're going to train everybody, and then we're going to move on to the next project, and we're not thinking about like the life cycle of that product. Like, let's say, I don't know, you put in a new accounting system, and you think you're going to use that accounting system for the next 15 years. Well, there's going to be updates to that. You don't get the accounting system and then nobody ever touches it for 15 years. There's going to be different things that come up. There's going to be new people that need to be trained. So you really have to create that training environment to basically serve all parts of that life cycle, from the time you get it to new people coming in to anytime there's new updates. Mm, And especially the Microsoft products nowadays. I mean, the amount of updates they push to those is kind of insane. I know there's a big one coming out for Outlook. I don't know if you guys have dealt with that, Anthony, but it's proving to be very, very unpopular on out on the Reddit threads. But it's coming. It's like a weight over everyone's shoulders. But anyway, they're pushing out all these updates, and we're kind of thinking like, okay, well, when we did that originally, that's good enough, and we're hoping, I guess, that the new person comes in and they're going to train them in Outlook and OneDrive and Teams and all the other kinds of things. But that may or may not be the case. And the one other thing I think about, and I think you've mentioned this before, is not everyone's made to be a trainer. So someone can excel in a job role. I mean, they can be the best person you absolutely have, but it doesn't mean that they're going to be a good trainer to the next person, right? And I think, especially in smaller companies, and I don't know if you would agree, but a lot of times you don't have 5 or 10 of the same job roles. So you're kind of stuck. You just like, you hope the person that is being replaced can train them in that full way and that they're a good trainer. And you just kind of cross your fingers and wait a few years to see and find out.
Yeah, especially for those that are, a one-person shop with IT, I do think in some cases it may not be feasible for the IT department to be doing this training, but you can point them in the right direction, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a little bit.
Yeah. So I think that's a great lead into our kind of the next topic. Anthony, in your opinion, what makes good technology training? Like in your mind, what should like good training include?
Well, it's really just having the people get involved with it and actually I think that's what good training is. There's a million different ways to shake it, but I think if you settle on one format, you're doing yourself and doing the people at your organization a disservice. Really, you gotta take it in different fashions if you can. So we try to take a multifaceted approach, and now we've done some things and we've stopped them because we didn't see much use. But we do lunch and learns. We do, sometimes when we roll out a new product, obviously we do new training. We actually have a learning management system that we recently rolled out. We've pushed some things, some video recordings to that. We've released videos. We've released full length videos, and we've also released shorts. We had a thing called IT Shorts. We actually dropped that. I'm actually thinking of picking it back up. Right now, our core focus is the lunch and learns, and for that, we try to get people to follow along if we can, and just try to make it entertaining. It's really just getting people's attention and making it a fun environment is the big thing for us.
So building off of that, you talked about some of the different methods, and we're going to talk a little bit in more detail about some of those in a second here. But what do you see like a good cadence, right, for technology training? Like, how often do you need to do it? At what times? At what points in someone's career? Like, let's just pick a particular product, maybe, so we can be more specific. Let's say you guys implemented OneDrive, right, as your storage software sharing platform of choice. When does someone need to be trained on that, and then how often do they need like retraining?
So I don't really have an exact answer on that, but just general thoughts is definitely initially, someone needs training on that. And if they're using it, typically they will follow along. And it depends on the frequency that they're using it. But the way, like for our lunch and learns, and this is my philosophy, I know not everyone agrees, not even in our own organization. But we make them strictly voluntary. I don't want people sitting down, if they like, I know how to use OneDrive enough to do my job. Like, I'm not gonna make it mandatory that they come in. But if someone, looking to learn about the new things or maybe get a refresher on some of the old things out there, then more power to them. As far as frequency, I don't think you can do it frequently enough. And when I say that, it's not like for our department, we couldn't cover OneDrive annually. Like, it would have to be every couple years just because there's so many topics to cover.
Mhm.
So I really just as much as you're willing to take on, I would say, just because we've got all these different topics that we do have to cover.
I agree with you on that. I would say it's difficult, and we'll talk about some tools and techniques to, I think, get a lot better. But absolutely, when they come in, I think when they come in, maybe even more than just one time. I think a lot of times, even honestly, I think this may be a mistake that we do with that kind of that one and done training too. Is really it's a lot to take in. When you do a new thing, and up front, we'll use OneDrive. Keep going back to that. So let's say someone is brand new. They just get there. They probably need an initial kind of like the basics and at least getting them going, and then maybe some advanced stuff like 2 or 3 weeks after that, and then another maybe less than 2 or 3 weeks after that, and then maybe at the end of the year, just kind of an overall like maybe a conclusion on all of those things, just to kind of make sure that like all the stuff that you told them about Makes sense. And then for someone that uses it every day, I think especially when there's a new big update, there needs to be some sort of training. And then honestly, this is going to kind of sound weird, but I would say right before they retire. I know that's kind of weird but if we're going to have to rely on people to do some amount of training, then I want them to be refreshed on it right before we start hiring that next person so that they have like the most current and up to date mindset on it and how it, how they would basically continue that training with the next person.
Yeah, that's interesting on the exit part, but yeah, with, doing a proper turnover, like, especially with something like that because they're gonna be relying on it, I think that would be a good thing if you could swing that.
Yeah. I just think you tell me if I'm wrong here, but when someone, whatever they get right away when they come there, it anchors them. So if you get bad training in OneDrive, like if someone comes in and they're like, OneDrive's great, I sometimes use it, it's not that useful, and here's the big deficiencies, and that's like what they hear right when they come in,
Mhm.
like it anchors them. And you can't, it takes years and years and years of like it being not that way for them to remove that anchor, if that makes sense. You can kind of
Yeah.
see it if anyone's ever used any of the AI models. Start a long conversation with the AI model and just kind of go on and then have it change what it originally gave you. It tends to want to like keep maintaining some of that original response all the way through. It gets anchored by what it's already told you. And the only way to get out of that usually is to start a whole brand new conversation. So I think that's really the thing we got to make sure we get right.
Yeah, first impressions definitely have a huge impact on it because we focus on that whenever we release a new product because we know, the product may work well, 2 weeks down the road, but if it's a nightmare those first 2 weeks, people are gonna remember that for years, and you're right, if
Mm-hmm.
you had someone new coming on and they're getting told that, it's a garbage product or something like that, then, if they're truly listening to that person, they're gonna have that negative connotation maybe their entire career.
You kind of talked a little bit about it earlier, but they're like, how do we make it better? If we think good training is training up front, kind of cadence training over time, maybe some training toward the end of their career, if they're going to be part of their partly responsible for training the new person. What kind of tools? You mentioned some of the tools and techniques. Have you found any of those that you mentioned to be like more effective than others? I think you mentioned like an LMS. We do an LMS as well, and it has a combination of video and quizzes. And have you found anything that really kind of captured the audience and you felt was more effective, or do you really feel like people are kind of their own person and they're gonna like listen in the best way that they can to learn?
I do think each person's a little unique, but overall, I would say, and so I just did this, and it's been successful every time we did it. But when our board of directors get new iPads, we do iPad training. We'll talk a little bit about security, which they get annual cybersecurity end user training every year, and then we'll also talk about their basically they've got a internal SharePoint site that has some tools built in there for them, and we sometimes will dive into a couple other things, but what we do is no PowerPoint slides. I literally have I'll be on an iPad, I'll have my screen displayed on the projector or screens, and I'll have them and I'll instruct them at the beginning. I'm like, "I want you all to follow along, and if you have questions or hit any snags, raise your hand and we'll get you caught up." And you gotta make sure you give people time to keep on track when you're doing that, but an interactive session, I think, hands down is gonna be better, and depends on what you're training on. Obviously, you can't do that with everything, but I think when you have the option to have people follow along themselves, it's definitely gonna help them out, and that's one thing I noticed when I got to Fort County, and basically, people would have questions on iPads, and, this is just turning any time into, like, a little training session. People would come in, and it really wasn't I wouldn't say it was my folks' issue, the people that had the questions, if they had a iPad question or how to do something, they would just turn it over to you, hand you the iPad. And this has taken a while to beat in everyone's head. I'm like, don't take the iPad, have them drive, have them do it because they're more likely to remember it. If you just
Hmm.
do it for them, they're never going to get it or they're not going to pick it up. So anytime you're even just answering questions and stuff like that, take that to be an opportunity to teach someone. and have them do it themselves, I think they're much more likely to remember it if they do.
Yeah, I agree. Totally agree with that. I've done that even with just family members, done that with their iPhone. Like, I don't know how to do this, and they want to just hand it to you, but actually showing them how to do it really does help. In-person trainings, I think, are most effective. They're very difficult. It's a lot to set up. You've got all the other things like getting the room and set aside. You got snacks and drinks and all that stuff, and like lunch sometimes, maybe if it's a larger one. They're the best, I think, for a lot of people. Not everybody. Some people can sit there and watch videos and gain more out of that. But obviously, the other ones play a role, especially with how often you're going to be able to do it. You can't, if you want to do training, well, a good example is cyber training. We do cyber training maybe once a month, or some people even do it once a week. That's not something you're going to be able to get people in a room on that often. So you got to remember that. But, you want a wide breadth. LMS, if you don't have one, is very effective. If nothing else, it helps you track the training, right? Because I know there has been times when people they say they need more training, and you can actually one look at it and say you're right, like we haven't provided enough training, or we have provided a lot of training. Here are the other options, like what was deficient about these that you felt like you didn't get where you needed. Can we improve those? And then totally agree with you on having someone that's dedicated to that. We have done that. I guess it's been about 7 years ago, I would say, somewhere around in there. We did that and created a role for that, and I think that's really like unlocked a lot of things. If nothing else, it has someone that's like really just like specialized in creating training, and they can do it in a way faster way, and they have like an eye for it. Where our training kind of feels stale and wooden, their training feels engaging, and it's just like someone wants to do it versus like has to do it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So one thing that we have found some success in that doesn't necessarily require like a constant like thought pattern and like process of like we got to push out training, we got to do training, is to having a pretty robust knowledge base. Is that something you guys do? And then will you agree with that a knowledge base where people can kind of like self figure out procedures and certain types of things? How does that fit into it like a training program, and how does that enhance a training program?
So, that's one that we really don't have. We have a few documents, but that's something we really I wouldn't consider that we have a full knowledge base. I will say this, we did have some success with it with COVID. So, we had a bunch of employees remoting in, working from home, which working from home never existed before COVID at our organization. And what we did is we created a document over certain applications, like how to sign into the call center, how to VPN into the network, just basics, how to troubleshoot their headset and a few other things. And, before that, we were getting calls every single time someone went home. Even people that would come back in the office and then go back home, like they would still call us. And we handed that documentation out, and if they called in, we're like, did you reference the documentation? And, anyways, they kinda caught on that we weren't gonna help them out until they kinda went through it. I mean, there was exceptions to that, obviously, if we need to get people make sure people were able to sign in and stuff like that, but, that documentation saved us and saved them. They learned something by doing it themselves as well, by following the documentation. So I definitely think it has its advantages. We've just had a struggle with that.
Yeah, I feel pretty good in this area. I wouldn't say it's perfect. I think there's still some departments that I think could really like jump into this. They have good documentation, but it's not necessarily in a format and a way where it's easily found. But we started this with our IT group. Obviously, I feel like IT is one of those where you just about have to have some sort of good documentation, or it's hard to really manage your environment. Started there. We're able to influence some of the other departments into looking at this, and we finally got really our front office staff like fully bought in on this as well. So they have a really good knowledge base, and it ties into our knowledge base, so we can kind of search both. Where if they need to find a procedure for how to do something, if they need to find like just information on what to give, maybe a member that calls in, it's right there. And it does provide them kind of like that daily help. Now, I wouldn't say it fully supports like or kind of eliminates the need for any training, but I think for things that are like spotty one-off stuff, it really can provide that need. I still think it's hard for someone to read kind of an article on a knowledge base and kind of have that same level of training if like maybe if something to do with OneDrive, for example, if we go back to our prior example. It's not quite the same, even with videos and things like that. It's not quite the same, but I think it can provide them that maybe that refresher that I was kind of mentioning, where they've gotten that training initially, maybe even they have an annual training, but then they just like, oh, what was that? Like one little thing again, and they can jump into there, and that has been helpful as well.
Yeah, one of the things we've struggled with, and this is I would like to get there. It's one of those things we're just not there. But so like we do have some individual documents on certain things, and like I said, the most successful one was the one we did for COVID for those working remote. But our struggle is not one, not every department has documentation source, and two, the ones that do have documentation all have a separate way of doing it. They're all tools that we use throughout, but there's especially with Microsoft, there's so many ways that you can do it. We got some that are fully utilizing SharePoint, we got some that are using OneNote, and then we've got some other stuff out there, I'm sure Microsoft related, but I've tried pushing us into having like one system for the entire company, but I haven't sold that yet. But eventually I think I will.
Yeah. Well, there you go. Keep plugging away. So I don't want to have every. I guess it seems like today's buzzword obviously is AI, and I don't want it to be like the only thing we focus on really. But I do think AI is gonna it's gonna make an impact to how training is done. In your eyes, like where do you see AI kind of fitting in with all these other training methods, or maybe even like how often someone's trained, all that kind of stuff? How do you see AI kind of playing a part?
So I think AI potentially could play a big part. Do I think it plays a big part within our organization right now? No. But we're looking at using RAG, retrieval augmented generation, to basically ingest our documentation and be able to just ask AI, our internal AI, like, how do I do this and how do I do that? Between the our documentation and then just what's out there that the system's actually trained on, that's a pretty powerful tool. And I think just with every software application, right now we're used to having these menus and drop downs and stuff like that. I think AI is going to change just software interfaces in general and even training, and just being able to have a console and either you could talk to it if you have it set up, or type in your questions and stuff like that. But I think it's going to definitely become a thing. And then one thing right now I think would, even if you don't have RAG set up, the ability to role play with an AI system is awesome. Like, you can do a lot there. Say, "Hey, I wanna have a difficult conversation with an employee," or you could say, "Hey, how can I better talk to the board on such and such?" But you can do that role play. You can even say, "Hey, I wanna do a performance review. Can you act like you're my employee, and this is the performance review?" Whatever situation, you can have AI imitate that situation with you.
I think you're right on track there. The only couple things I would add to that, number one is I think you can use AI to help actually do analysis on your own training you create. So if you create training on Microsoft OneDrive, you can actually feed it into AI platform, whether that's internal or external, and you can ask it if you missed anything. Like, did I miss anything that should be said or should have been covered that I didn't? Did I need to cover one area more than I did, or I need to cover one area less than I did? That kind of thing. So I think you can have it enhance your training. And then also, I think, and this goes almost, it's kind of pseudo training slash just like real time assistance. I don't know. I didn't know what to call it. I kind of wrote it as a note, but I do think, especially for, I would say, phone roles, where you're on the phone with someone, talking with someone. But I also think, I mean, potentially even in many different roles, but I could see AI being able to like listen to the conversation and provide real time training and feedback in line. Like, this may be kind of pie in the sky kind of stuff, but could we get to a point where, let's say, a newer person is on the phone with a member or a customer, and the customer asks them on how to do it, and the AI actually like highlights like where they need to click on the screen, or maybe that's like stage one. Then stage two is it allows them to do it, but if they click in another area, it kind of redirects them back, so they're still learning on how to do it. Or maybe it provides them knowledge base articles that they can say, to the person if the person asks a certain type of question. And then maybe even for that past like phone, that's really already somewhat available. And even past that, could an AI like kind of help me self monitor my inbox, right? And even maybe, I know this kind of sounds weird, but understand my knowledge level in certain things. And if someone asks me a question, it can provide me with like the knowledge that I'm missing. Hey, I think you're putting in this, and this is where you should enhance that. Or hey, based on what I know about you, you need to like read this before you answer this question. I don't know. That sounds kind of wild, maybe a little bit.
Actually,
You
going down the rabbit hole, I was listening to a podcast, and this venture capitalist, he has hundreds of blog articles, if not thousands, been doing it for like over a decade, and he's also had YouTube videos and all that. He literally trained an AI system on all of his blogs, all of his videos, and it's literally like having like an AI version of him that he can run stuff past and even, make decisions that would align with how he would think. And this guy acted like he had great success with it. It's kind of
know.
crazy. That's happening now.
Yeah, and even I think sometimes we also got to realize that what we're using now is also what was developed several years ago in some ways. Obviously, it's been updated, but it's not, foundational. You're going to see like foundational differences as generations of AI come out. All right. So, moving past that, Anthony, do you have any? I was just thinking, I kind of threw this in there into our outline. Do you have any real world like successes where you feel like maybe you did a really good job with training and like how that really helped in that particular technology that you were rolling out? I think.
Yeah, one thing we've had success in is some GIS products that we have. Our GIS programmer, he knows these inside and out, and on occasion, he's given these classes, and they always are a great success. The best sessions that we've ever had, though, with that is where the vice president of that department that's receiving the training is in there and interjects and basically stresses the importance of it. Basically having that buy-in from the top down helps a lot. But with those guys, anytime we get a major event or a storm, they're out there using that product with great success, and it helps them out quite a bit. But I think the thing that really stood out was having their leadership support us, while we're giving that training. What about you, Tanner?
Yeah, I think there are a few. I would think we had a major update to our kind of our accounting and customer information systems, and it kind of moved from one platform to another platform. And I think we did a really good job with that to make sure that there was like videos and articles and real time people that actually went around to the offices as the transition was happening, and there was people there even in the weeks following. And then we continued to push out like new things. We would do videos on any new thing that we found because we were honestly learning as we went a little bit too, because there's just so many new things. But we would put anything that provided value, we'd create a video on it. And I think, for lack of a better word, there, like that blitz from like all angles really like covered everything. And I don't remember there being a lot of negative feedback. Everybody kind of felt like they were prepared for that change. So, I know this is kind of something we've talked about quite often, but we all have deficiencies. Maybe it's not even training. Maybe there's someone out there that's like blowing training up, but there's some sort of deficiency. And if we feel like training is a deficiency, and I think for a lot of people, technology training specifically, maybe not job role training, but is a deficiency. So to do something about it, you got to actually start measuring it and actually put it as, some sort of initiative that you're going to do. You can't just talk about it. You have to do that. So I encourage our listeners out there, like if you want to make a change with it, you need to work with, whoever, if there's a training, some sort of training director or manager that you have, or a department that's head of heads training, work with them and really take advantage of that. But if there's not, then that's something you got to actually make as an initiative. If you want something to improve, it's got to be written down and it's got to be measured. It's got to be something that you put resources and time into. So if you want to improve training, make it a priority. And I think overall, in my opinion, is if you do a really good job with training on foundational technology, you're probably going to get less calls. You're probably going to get less, I don't know how to do this, explanations that you have to do. And ultimately, it's probably going to end up saving you time.
One thing that it's an easy one to get a measurement on, and I know I've mentioned it before, but for our outside folks, they work on an iPad, and we made it a focus to show how to report, 1, what a phishing email is, and 2, how to report it on an iPad or a mobile device specifically. And, now granted, we got a carrot out there of $250 gift card every quarter that we raffle off for the people that enter it. But one thing I'm
I'm sure
super
that
proud
helps.
of is the, linemen. I think 3 of the 4 last winners were linemen. So, never
That's
thought
awesome.
I would see that in my life, but, that's one thing I'm definitely proud of, and proud of them for, taking an interest in it and doing it.
So, Anthony, I think we've covered training well from an overall standpoint. Any kind of final thoughts before we wrap up this episode?
I know we talked about success stories and all that, but, I know we've all had some training sessions that did not go well, and I'll start off, but I'd be curious for you, something that you're like, "I'm never gonna do that again." And one that sticks out in my mind, and this has probably happened a couple of times with us, but really, going into, like, something long and complex training and having it with too many people, like, trying to do it with
Hmm.
the entire organization. It is not feasible. There's just too many bodies, too many people in different roles and use it in different ways. That's something we're taking a lesson learned. We're gonna make sure that this happens next time, that, we break it down into smaller groups.
I would say something we've learned that the least efficient or the least beneficial trainings we've had have been the ones where it was like you take, especially people that are out in the field, and you have them like trained for like full days.
Yes.
Bring them in at 8 a.m. and go to 5. If you're gonna do that, you really gotta have like some movement in there, getting them up and about. Maybe if it's an iPad thing, maybe getting them outside working on the iPad, coming back in for the training, outside doing this, coming back in for a break, going to lunch. Like you need a lot of like movement, but just long, drawn out, like more static trainings to folks that are used to having a day that's full of variety. Yes.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like, make them smaller, make them easier and bite sized.
That's funny. We've had some vendors come in and, I understand because they're traveling, they might think this way, but they're like, "We're gonna do training from 8 to 5." And I'm like, "You guys are crazy." I was like,
Yeah.
I said, "Let's start at 9:30 and 9:30 to 4, even if you do it
Yeah.
well and take breaks." Like, I think there's just only so much a person can absorb in a day.
Oh, yeah. I was gonna say, I remember earlier in my career looking at those boot camps. I don't know if you ever looked at one of those boot camps, and it's like, we're gonna be going 8 a.m. to like 7 p.m. every night for 6 days. And I'm like, nah, I don't think that's up for me.
Well, if you're paying thousands of dollars for it, that'll change the incentive a
Well,
little
that's like,
bit.
yeah, it was a little incentive, but I'm just like, I just don't think that's gonna be effective for me. Like if they
Yeah.
stretch it out over 3 weeks or something, maybe, but yeah. All right, well, that's it for this episode. I did want to just tease our next episode. We're going to have a guest again, so excited about that. But we're going to be talking a little bit about third party vulnerabilities and really third parties in general and how they make us more vulnerable and like what we can do about it. So excited to bring on a guest and talk all parts third party cybersecurity. I'm excited about that. As we mentioned earlier, we'd love to hear from you. We're going to post about when the podcast drops. We'd like to hear your training stories. If you got some interesting, funny training stories, maybe, or you got some awesome things that you do that you feel like everyone else should know, drop a comment in any of our social media posts or reach out to us and tell us that so we can share. But yeah, start the conversation when we post about this and let us know what works for you, what doesn't work, and definitely leave the funny stories on there. As we mentioned, we record every other Monday. We'd love to hear from you. Shoot us an email if you want to provide us any feedback. We'd love to have episode ideas from anyone. If you have something you want us to talk about, you want to come on the show, shoot us an email. You never know. We might just have you on here to talk about something if you're passionate about something. Definitely just reach out to us. I would love to hear from you. Some of our best episodes have been feedback from listeners or viewers. But anyway, until next time, this is an episode of Off the Wire.
Thank you, everyone.